Welcome to Sarpy Outlook. My name is Lisa Fricke, and our guest today is Rhoades, who's with the Public Service Commission. Welcome.
Thank you.
It's so good to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
Crystal represents District 2 and was elected to the Commission in November of 2014. She earned her BA in Political Science and Psychology and a Master's degree in Political Science from UNO. So, Crystal, I guess a good place to start would be, why did you decide to run for this office, and what are the main responsibilities for this office?
I was really interested in this office because they do a lot of infrastructure work, making sure that public safety is protected, and that consumers have good advocates that can help protect their interests as well. And so I was really drawn to the Public Service Commission. They handle things like telecom regulation, grain elevators, taxis and limousines.
Wow.
We do robocalling and the oversight of that. And so it's a really diverse mix, and there's a lot of opportunity to really work with constituents to make sure that public safety is protected.
Now, you mentioned taxis, and my mind went automatically to, what is it, Uber?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, can you tell us a little bit about those two services? There are two of them. I don't remember the other one.
Right, so Uber and Lyft are what are referred to as transportation network companies. And so from their perspective, they are not cabs. They are a technology company that are facilitating rides between drivers and customers. But the Nebraska legislature has worked with the commission and as well as Uber and Lyft and a number of other stakeholders, insurance companies, bankers, to craft a law that allows for those services to be legal in Nebraska and for customers to be able to use those rideshare services, but also to make sure that public safety is still being protected. So making sure the cars are inspected, background checks are being conducted on the drivers, insurance requirements are being met. One of the big challenges with these particular providers is that there could be gaps potentially in the insurance coverage, and so one of the things that the Public Service the Commission evaluates is to make sure that all of the appropriate requirements are being met, so that we can make sure that people are getting the service they need, but that they're also safe in pursuing that.
Okay, and I've always wondered, what are the main common concerns of constituents that call your office?
We get actually a lot of complaints related to telephone service, which is kind of also an interesting dynamic, because we have the ability to regulate common carriers that deliver landline services. So if you have a phone in your business or your home that's a traditional telephone, we absolutely have jurisdictional authority over them for billing, for service complaints, those types of issues. Where things get a little bit more confusing is with the cell phones. We don't technically have any ability to regulate them, nor do we have any ability to regulate the voice over IP services, so things like Skype, Vonage, those types of services. And so it's been very tricky for consumers to understand that distinction, and it's been very challenging for the Commission, because on the one hand, telephone service as far as the consumer is concerned, but telephone service is not telephone service as far as the law is concerned. That being said, we do get a number of calls from different constituents about problems that they're having with their carriers. If it's a cell phone company or if it's a voice over IP, we do typically try to work with the companies to get those issues resolved for a couple of reasons. One, those companies have absolutely no interest in being regulated, and therefore would like to do what they can to ensure that the legislature doesn't decide that they need more oversight. And the second reason is that most of those companies really want to keep their customers. They don't want to lose. They don't want to lose customers, and so if we can help them to navigate any issues that they're having, we do try to do that.
As you were talking, I was thinking about computer wireless service that goes out to the West. Do you ever work with other agencies that you can help together, kind of coordinate together to get any complaints about that?
Sure, yes, absolutely.
Can you give us an example?
Right, so we'll get, for example, we had an outage, a 911 outage recently within the last week or so. So there were actually a couple of different outages. 911 is also one of the things that the Commission sort of has oversight over. But there was a nursing home that had has a voice over IP provider. They called 911. The call was routed to Canada, and then back to the United States. And so obviously that causes a huge delay. What we're doing is an investigation looking into what can we do to improve service, what kind of enhancements can we make to 911 service to ensure that those kinds of things don't happen again. And so the commission is very interested in working with companies and their constituents to resolve those kinds of issues.
Yeah. And that's really scary when you don't have, a direct line to 911. So is there an alternate number that's provided in case something like that happens, and how does that get disseminated to the public?
Right. So we had an outage a couple of days ago here in Douglas and Sarpy County, where a line was cut, and the service was completely down for all Verizon customers to 911. And what they did as a press release, they talked to the local news media. They also did awareness through Facebook and Twitter to give them an administrative number that they can call. Of course, people may or may not know about that. They may or may not write that down. They may or may not remember that in the event of an emergency. And so the commission is working very hard to make sure that there's enough redundancy in the system. We'll do troubleshooting, and we'll do an in-depth analysis of what happened. What can the commission do to ensure that it doesn't happen going forward? Unfortunately, sometimes you have to have these outages before people know how to be proactive in the future. And so we're going to hopefully use this as a learning opportunity to make sure that these kinds of outages don't continue to happen, because they're very, very dangerous. It's a very serious problem.
Yeah, that's kind of scary.
Yeah.
I was just thinking, too, about it especially happens during election time, but also any time of year where people are getting robocalls. And it seems to me that there's some recent regulation about that. How can you explain to the public what they can do if they get a robocall?
So if you're getting a robocall, you should absolutely contact the Public Service Commission, particularly if they're not giving you certain information. There are laws, and then the commission also has rules and regulations about the type of information that can be conveyed during a robocall. And we really strive to make sure that those rules are strictly enforced, because we do know that it can be bothersome to our constituents. And so if you're getting a robocall, my advice is to call the Public Service Commission, convey to them that you received the call, when you received the call, who made the call to you, what the content of that call was, the best you can remember. We'll make sure that that vendor has followed all of the applicable rules and regulations. If they have not, we can open a complaint on behalf of that constituent to try and curb that from happening again and again. But yes, it's incredibly frustrating for many customers.
It is, and especially the elderly. They get these scam robocalls, and so are there fines related to when you do the investigation? There
can be, yes. So if they haven't followed the appropriate rules and regulations, if their dialer isn't registered, if they haven't conveyed on whose behalf they're making the call, those are all finable offenses. And the commission can fine up to $10,000 per day or up to $2 million annually for violation of those rules. So we take it very, very seriously. We do have some pretty good enforcement tools at our disposal, and we absolutely want to enforce those rules. So if you are getting those calls, even if you're not sure if it's legal or illegal or if they follow the appropriate protocols, if you notify us, we can find out, and if not, we can take appropriate remediation.
I'm sure our audience is going to appreciate that. And I was wondering, you mentioned fines. I wonder, where does this fine money go?
It goes to the public school fund. Yes. So the money is then directed into the public school system, and the legislature did that for a couple of reasons. They certainly didn't want to give the commission a negative incentive to fine people and be unreasonable in those fines. And so a good way to mediate that is to say, if a fine is collected, we're going to put it to use in the public school system.
Wow, that's a wonderful use of those funds. I really like hearing that. One other thing, a lot of people are discussing the Keystone XL Pipeline. I wonder if you can tell us, do you have any oversight on that? If you do or don't, can you explain that situation involving the pipeline?
Sure. So the Nebraska legislature basically passed a piece of legislation that gave a permit to TransCanada for the Keystone Pipeline. They gave all other siting responsibilities to the commission, but exempted this particular project from our purview. When they did that, that did trigger a number of
That's okay.
Again, that triggered a number of lawsuits. And so those are actually still in process. They're still being appealed. They're still being reviewed. We don't know as a commission what the impact of that will be. Now, the last decision that was rendered relative to those lawsuits with the Nebraska Supreme Court, the court basically said, we're going to let this piece of legislation stand. It was a split decision. There was disagreement among the justices, but they ultimately said, we're not going to kick this back to the Public Service Commission. Does that mean it won't come back to the Public Service Commission? Well, not exactly, because what might happen, we don't know, is there are still some eminent domain challenges that are happening.
Oh, I know.
If those decisions go a different way, that could invalidate the current route that they have, and if they have to go back to the drawing board and start over, it could ultimately come back to the commission for review. One of the things, though, that's really, really important for the public to understand about the siting of that pipeline is that the commission does not have the authority to reject it on safety. The legislature did not give us the authority to do that. And so what we do have and what we can do is not decide necessarily if the pipeline will be built, but where the pipeline will be built. And so we do have some ability to control where that pipeline is sited.
Well, I have a question. If the Public Service Commission isn't controlling the safety of the pipeline, then who is?
That's a really great question, and I'm not sure we have a really great answer for that.
That's scary.
Yes, so it's, yes, it is scary.
Oh my goodness, I did not know that. And so I have one final question. Out of, everything we've discussed, it's been very interesting and informative. But is there any one thing that we haven't discussed that you would like to share with our audience right now?
I think that the biggest thing that I would want the public to be aware of is the need for a next generation 911 and the need to allow the Public Service Commission some additional authority to deal with some of the telecom and telecommunications companies. So as we're moving forward, I would like to see the Public Service Commission have at least a limited ability to deal with cell phone carriers and those voice over IP carriers. From the public safety perspective, the 911 perspective, but also just from resolving consumer complaints. The reason that telephone service historically has been regulated is that these usually are monopolies or partial monopoly systems. Or you may have, in places like Omaha, you have a very competitive, robust market, and in Sarpy County as well. But you may, if everybody's doing the same thing,
Right.
it may be difficult for consumers to feel as if they're really being protected.
Right.
And so it would be nice to have the ability to at least follow up on complaints and billing issues and get some of those resolved. And definitely it would be helpful to have some authority to oversee them as it relates to how they're providing 911 service or coverage issues or problems related to that. So those are big issues. The other issue is really moving forward with next generation 911, and a lot of people are kind of like, what does that even mean? But it really has to do with the ability to make calls from your cell phone, make those voice over IP calls as well as your traditional landline service, but also to communicate data points to the public the call centers that take those 911 calls. So maybe a photo of a traffic accident, or maybe some other emergency, and it could be a photo, it could be a text to 911. There are a lot of things that we can now do with our smartphones that historically we were not able to do. And so being able to really use those assets to their full capacity is incredibly important.
Oh, I understand that importance. We posted our contact information for our viewers. And on behalf of the Sarpy County Democrats, we are so glad that you took time out of your hectic schedule. And we wish you nothing but success as you move forward working for the commission and for us. So, valuable information. So contact her if you have any questions. And thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. It's been my pleasure.
Thank you.